Hi, welcome back to the Personality Hacker Podcast. My name is Joel Mark Witt.
And I'm Antonia Dodge.
This week, we're joined by guest host Susan Storm from Psychology Junkie. Hi, Susan.
Hi, everybody.
Hey, welcome back to the show.
Thanks for having me. I'm really excited to be here.
Okay, I've mentioned this before on the show to you, Antonia, casually in passing, but today, to you and Susan, I'm going to file a formal complaint to, to the universe. I'm not sure who I'm filing it with.
To the personality type gods.
Yeah, the personality type gods. I'm filing this complaint today. So we have our YouTube channels. We've got different YouTube channels set up. One we have for our profiler training program. And we've posted a 2-hour video of Dr. Dario Nardi live on the main stage at our profiler training event in Washington, D.C., where he gave a talk demonstrating some brain scan technology that he works with, and he used the ENFP personality type as basically his subject matter. And so ENFP is in the title of this video. So of course, a lot of ENFPs are coming to watch this video, which is my personality type in the Myers-Briggs system. I identify as an ENFP. And underneath the comments, in the comments section, ENFP after ENFP after ENFP keeps saying, there is no ENFP on the planet that could sit through a 2-hour video ever. What kind of idiots are you people? How dumb can you be? Yeah, that's right. Another ENFPs come in like, why are they thinking? They need to make this easier for us to access. No ENFP would sit here for this. This is ridiculous. Comment after comment after comment. And I'm like, I feel like my brethren, my ENFP brethren and sistren, is sistren a word? I don't even know if that's a word, are misrepresenting my personality type in an unhealthy way. Are you kidding me? Just because you're an ENFP, you can't sit still and absorb information for a 2-hour period of time? That is insane to me. And so today I'm filing a formal complaint that if you are a personality type that is my personality type, please don't represent me with an unhealthy behavior of having a low attention span or the inability to sit still or pay attention as something that is type related. That is you and maybe some other people like you, but that is not a ubiquitous type characteristic just for ENFPs. Okay, now I'm done with my filing a formal complaint. Why am I saying this though today, right? Well, we want to talk with you, Susan, on the show a little bit about stereotypes and projection and some of the things that we do as personality types to ourselves and each other, that really aren't very helpful for us to grow and be able to be the best versions of ourselves.
Right. I bet you have some around being an INFJ that drive you crazy, Susan.
Absolutely. There's definitely like this, because there's so much content about INFJs being the rarest type. There's a lot of people who go out and they're like, I am an INFJ, the rarest, most misunderstood, most superior, insightful type. And then there's this kind of buzz around INFJs that we're these superior snowflakes that just think everyone should worship us or something like that. And when I see that kind of content, or when I see people bashing INFJs for that kind of behavior, it does frustrate me because I'm like, I'm not like this, and I know so many INFJs who are not like that. And I think there's a version of that for each of the 16 personality types where people judge them based on bad experiences they had with, an unhealthy version of that type, or people use type as a crutch to lean on and say, well, I'm not, this is the way I am. You're just going to have to take it or leave it.
And you and I were having this conversation around unhealthy cognitive functions, which I think we want to really address in this podcast. The idea of what each function looks like when it's not healthy. And one of the reasons why, too, is we will engage with somebody of a certain personality type, and then that becomes if they're unhealthy and we don't like them, then that can become our imprint of that type. And so then we think, well, I don't like this type. And then we just, this percentage of the population that represents that type, then, everybody in that percentage becomes somebody you don't like, whether you know them or not. And It could be that they're just showing up in an unhealthy way, but you've already created this imprint in your mind. And then now you're incapable of typing somebody who might be of that same personality type. If you like them, well, then they couldn't possibly be, I don't know, like an ESTJ or whatever, because I don't like ESTJs.
Yeah. And then we put all these like unfair expectations on people. We decide we don't like people. Or we say, what's your type? And they say, oh, I'm an ESTJ. And you're like, oh, I know what to expect from you. I don't really, and you just put this filter of the last person that you didn't like who was an ESTJ over them, and it just damages relationships. So it's really important to not get this wrong.
Right. So it's not just understanding that there could be unhealthy expressions of type or unhealthy expressions of cognitive functions, but you could also have an unhealthy relationship with type itself.
Absolutely.
Okay, wait a minute here. I'm going to push back on this. Okay, the three of us, this is our living. This is what we do. We're professionals in this world. We write, speak, create programs. We talk typology all the time. And we all know the system pretty well. And I would say that I do see people of types, like personality types. And I do have a tendency to pattern. I wouldn't go as far as to say stereotype, but I do say, like, if I see a certain personality type, let's say an ISTP, I have a certain expectation of how they're going to show up. I'm like, okay, they're probably going to have these characteristics and show up in this way. So I do project onto people when I hear their type of how they're going to show up. Now, I've trained myself to be a little more flexible. When they show characteristics that aren't that, I don't assume they have the type wrong. I just assume, I'm seeing more nuance and more variance of this type showing up. But Susan, as an INFJ, my assumption, and maybe this is me even projecting in this scenario, you go through the world, and I really am admiring of INJs, INTJs and INFJs a lot, because you all seem to have a sense of the pattern of how people show up. And your introverted intuition perspectives process can really see into somebody's behaviors, how their mindset works. And often you're not wrong. Often you guys have pretty good guesses on how people will show up. So how often do you think you're going to see something from somebody and then they show something very different? They surprise you. How often are you surprised? I guess my suggestion is that you're not surprised that often.
I'm not often surprised by the people I work with in daily life. No. A lot of times people's perspectives do kind of model their typical type behavior. But I have had experiences with, for example, like an unhealthy ISFP. Like I've had really bad experiences with an ISFP. So then I meet other ISFPs, and I have to make a conscious decision to tell myself, this is not that person. Like this person is not going to be like that person. And then clear out the messy wiring that I might have had in my mind about this bad person I knew as an ISFP. I need to make sure that I am separating out all that bad data so that I'm not projecting that onto the other person.
Right, because even with introverted intuition or perspectives, you can still get unhelpful narratives locked in. And it still and it requires information. Like it's not like you just get in somebody's space and suddenly know everything that's going on for them. Like the more familiarity you have with a person, the better your perspective shifting is going to be.
Yes, it's so important for INJs to actually go out in the world and have conversations with a variety of people from the same type, so that you aren't sticking with this one pattern you saw one time, so that you are realizing and seeing the different varieties in the pattern. And you can take out you can separate the unhealthy data from the healthy data and know what the difference is. Yeah.
Well, and to go back to your formal complaint, Joel, that you lodged.
Thank you.
With the personality type gods about ENFPs. I mean, we just did a podcast about type and ADHD, which indicated that according to not the most recent information, because we don't have a lot of recent information, but there does tend to be a correlation between ADHD and ENFP type preferences. So to have, ENFP after ENFP after ENFP say, there's no way I can sit here for 2 hours, that makes sense, right? Like, because they might be dealing with some attention deficit issues. That said, I think what we're talking about here, and which might be the crux of it, is that might not be an ENFP, that might be you. And you happen to be an ENFP. Like, not every ENFP is going to be incapable of sitting and watching something. The other assumption is that was made for them, but the video wasn't made for them. The video was made about them to a group of people who were at a professional conference around type. It just happens to be that was the personality type that was being, used as an example. And so there's this idea, I think, that when we get into type, and you're not wrong, Joel, like we are saturated in this world. And so because of that, we go, well, why can't people understand how to use type better? Like, I mean, we're going to be more skilled with a tool we're using all the time, and that makes sense. But that said, there are still ways to build a healthier relationship with the model, the healthiest relationship with the model possible, or with type possible, which is to have your finger on the pulse of when you are projecting onto other people how you go about this type. Like, how am I showing up as an ENTP is not how every other ENTP is going to show up. And I need to remember that when an ENTP shows up differently than me, I can't, first of all, like go, oh, well, you can't be an ENTP because blah, 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 blah. And second, I can't also assume that everybody who has my type preferences is going to also have my idiosyncrasies. And then on top of that, if I'm observing behaviors, even that ENFP video, I could get an idea in aggregate of how ENFPs are going to show up because I have like 100 comments of them all saying the same thing. Well, that can give me a pattern of behavior, but I still can't project any of that onto every person I run into who's an ENFP. So I still need to give people their individuality. Type isn't a replacement for individuality or identity. It's just, it's one of the ways that we can understand ourselves further. But it really shouldn't eclipse our ability to engage with people and give them a shot and a chance. Like you were talking about, Susan, you might run into an unhealthy ISFP, and it's really important that the narrative doesn't stick that this is what all ISFPs are like.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And I think it's important to go over what causes unhealthy behavior so that you can identify what might be the source material for that. So one of the things that can cause unhealthy behavior is stress. One of the things that I've written about a lot is grip stress, where you've been suppressing your inferior function and trying to solve all of your life's problems with your dominant function for a long time. And then your inferior function bubbles up and is like, I'm taking the wheel. And then you have these erratic inferior functions responses to things. And that can be one of the ways that unhealthy type behavior can show up. An ISFP, for example, who starts steamrolling people with extroverted thinking, or an ENFP who starts steamrolling people with introverted sensation, which is more maybe steamrolling themselves a little bit. So stress is one of the things that can cause unhealthy manifestations of type.
Right. And it's important to remember that not anybody can experience that. Everybody experiences that at some point.
Yeah. So for even just speaking for myself as an INFJ, when I get into the grip of extroverted sensation, I make impulsive, reckless decisions. I want to kind of set a fire to my life and all my long-term projects and just walk away. I might overeat on food, just be like, I don't care anymore. Like, fill me up with extroverted sensation, like overload. And that could be like, I'm going to blast music as loud as I possibly can and eat everything I can find. Or it could be, I'm going to like blow all my savings on this trip to somewhere I've never been. And so that would be unhealthy SE behavior from an INFJ or an INTJ. So every type, when they're in the grip, could just use it. Like, it's like they want this extreme immersion with their inferior function, and it comes about in an unhealthy way.
And so when somebody is experiencing a grip, and I've noticed, or at least we wrote in our book, that there's also, some people can get caught in a grip, like a low grade version of it, and be doing habituated behaviors from that place. And it's still a sign of stress. It's still a sign that something is not okay in this person's life, and they might not be able to solve it, and they're in a grip. It's like they're unhappy. It's not that they're trying to be obnoxious towards you. It's that they're dealing with something that is truly difficult to navigate through.
Exactly. And they might seem very different than your typical type. So that's an issue with typing people too, is you might see someone and go, wow, this really stressed out person is acting like a really unhealthy ESTJ. They must be an ESTJ, when really maybe they're an INFP who is like in a corporate setting and none of their natural gifts are valued, and they are operating in a grip state at work, 50% of the time. And you're seeing that 50%, you're saying this person's an unhealthy ESTJ, when really they're an INFP in the grip of extroverted thinking. So another thing that can cause unhealthy type behavior is trauma. So if you're dealing with the after effects of trauma, like childhood trauma, you may not seem like your typical the typical definition of your type, because childhood trauma and mental illness like anxiety, PTSD, or just even just the regular ongoing stress of recovering from that can cause you to look a lot different than a normal version of your type. People who experience trauma can have a really difficult time focusing. They can have a really hard time with their attention, with their learning, with their memory. They can have a hard time regulating their emotions. They can be less motivated. So there's a lot of different ways that a trauma response can show up in a person and cause them to not seem like the typical definition of that type. For example, maybe you're an ISTJ. And when you read about ISTJs, you hear a lot about how they typically they're really good at recounting past experiences in detail and comparing and contrasting past to present. But if you're dealing with an ISTJ who has recovered from intense childhood trauma, their memory might be like all over the place. They may have a really hard time recalling things, and they might be more emotionally triggered than your typical ISTJ. And so some of that unhealthy behavior may be a coping mechanism that they've used to deal with the trauma that they went through as a child. And that's another way that you might see differentiations from the normal type pattern.
Well, and sometimes people in this state are very clearly the type that they are. Like, they are obvious around their type preferences, but they show up in a way that is self-protective or is, like they're not as maybe generous as they would be if they were in a place of emotional abundance. They're in emotional scarcity, and maybe they fear vulnerability, and maybe they're being very self-protective. And so because of that, they come across a little prickly, or they come across in a way that, they're not paying as much attention to your comfort as they are just regulating whatever's going on for them. And then again, they can show up different, or they can be obvious in their type preferences. And I think the thing that I'm really thinking about as a through line through all of this is getting this imprint in your mind about what a personality type is like, because you're seeing an expression of somebody of that type who is going through something. That they're not, that they're dealing with something pretty big. And we go, well, that's how ISTJs are. And it's like, well, or maybe it's how somebody who's dealing with PTSD is. It's not really has anything to do with their type. It's just that, like everybody, they're filtering everything through the lens of their functions.
Exactly. Yeah. An ENFJ who is recovering from childhood trauma may not be that warm, open-minded, like Martin Luther King Jr. I mean, I'm sure he went through trauma too, but I mean, they may not appear like the picture you have in your head for an ENFJ, because like you said, they might be trying to protect themselves, trying to guard themselves from vulnerability, and that hampers their ability to reach out to people. Or maybe they're struggling to regulate their emotions, so they're messing up the harmony. We talk about extroverted feeling wanting harmony, but if you've got an ENFJ who is emotionally reacting too quickly because their brain is like a smoke detector that's constantly going off over bacon, and hopefully that makes sense, but they're constantly reacting emotionally because they're in a state of fight, flight, or freeze. So you're seeing a very different type of ENFJ than one who has like healthy coping mechanisms, who has a secure attachment and all of those things. So yeah, types can look a lot different when they're dealing with that. So another thing I've seen is really the opposite problem of what we've been talking about. People who have these really hard lives or a lot of stress, and so they're having to cope in maybe an unhealthy way. The opposite problem is maybe you've been catered to your whole life. Maybe you've never had to work on your weaknesses. Maybe you are an ESTP, and you've grown up around extroverted sensors, and you live in an SE space all the time, and you trust it, and it becomes inflated to the point where you're not developing your introverted thinking side, and you have zero patience for like extroverted feeling or introverted intuition. And so you're operating in like this warped extroverted sensation mode where you don't have balance. So that is another way that unhealthy type behavior can show up, is if people are just coddled into their dominant function their whole life, and they don't learn to work on, they're not balancing that out with input from the other functions. Because our dominant function shouldn't just work alone all the time. Your dominant function and your inferior function make up the spine of your personality type. And in order to have a healthy spine, you need to have some input from your inferior function. So an INFJ, like myself, who doesn't have a good relationship with extroverted sensation, who's always like, I don't need that. I only need to stay in this NI headspace. We could be really unrealistic. We could be completely out of touch with facts. We can be out of touch with what's happening around us. We can totally sacrifice the present for the sake of the future. There's a lot of bad things that can happen when you just only focus on your dominant and you're not giving those other functions room to breathe.
Right. That's what Jung called one-sidedness, and why in chapter 10 of Psychological Types, he basically describes all of the functions as some sort of psychosis.
Yeah.
Because when we only do one of them and double down, whether it's through coddling or protection, then it's imbalanced. It's very clearly imbalanced. And when it comes through being catered to, there's also a sense of entitlement around it.
This resonates a lot with me. So I'm going back to filing my formal complaint at the beginning. And as you're talking, Susan, I'm thinking about, most of the people on YouTube skew younger. And part of it might be that the reason the attention span for an ENFP, for example, it is somewhat of an ENFP trait. But I think as an ENFP matures, they can increase through training and through maturity and experience. They do increase. We ENFPs increase our attention span, as an example. But a generation of young people that are on TikTok all day, 10, 15-second little video clips over and over, or scrolling Twitter and looking at 280 characters or 260 characters at a time. It's 280. Yeah, 280. Yeah. Make sure I get that detail right, at least at the time of this recording. There's all these quick hits we're getting all the time. So our attention span is so thin already. And if it's a younger audience, then that would make sense that they've had it too good. They've had too many quick hits in a way. And so, of course, a 2-hour video is going to feel like an eternity to somebody that's trained that way. So, okay. But this also asks the question here. This is what I'll posit to both of you, Antonia and Susan. We are talking about healthy versus unhealthy personality types, and how cognitive functions show up healthy versus unhealthy, how personality types show up that way. And I'm realizing this list, the two you mentioned, Susan, trauma and stress. I was like, oh, okay. When we're talking about healthy versus unhealthy, trauma and stress basically make us unhealthy. Like we need to heal from something. We got to fix something that's broken or off. Like we have to have some healing happen in those. But when you mentioned the fact that people have it too good, and then I just mentioned this thing about ENFPs, it made me think, well, wait a minute, that's more of a maturity skill building angle. And we're lumping that in with healthy versus unhealthy. So maybe what we could do for a moment here is let's really get clear on what do we mean when we say healthy versus unhealthy versus mature or skill building, because I think sometimes maybe we're conflating all these things together.
That's a good point. To me, I see healthy as being someone who is able to tap into it respects all their functions. Whether you're not going to be able to be a perfect SE dominant type if you're an INJ, for example, but if you are giving your dominant function time to breathe, you're also supporting that with good auxiliary function use, and you're also spending time getting spurts of your tertiary and inferior as well, so that when you are with someone, like say you're an INJ and you're with an ESP, you can respect what they're bringing to the table instead of dismissing it or devaluing it. You see it as something that's a different perspective that might be worthwhile. That's what I guess what I think of when I think of a healthy type, is someone who's taking care of their dominant and auxiliary function while also respecting input from tertiary and inferior, as well as other functions that aren't even in their like primary function stack.
Right. Well, and just to address the concept of healthy, unhealthy versus lack of skill, I think when it comes to our functions, like we have an expected developmental phase for every sort of all the levels of us growing up. Like if we're still throwing temper tantrums at 12, that's considered, because we've been coddled, that's considered an unhealthy behavior for somebody at that age. But it wouldn't be necessarily for somebody who's a 3-year-old. And it's because we're expected to reach certain benchmarks of growth at certain places. And I think our functions are similar. There's an anticipation or expectation that we're going to hit certain benchmarks of that skill development because we've done things like, say, overcome obstacles with them, or, not allowed ourselves to get too passive in life. because our driver, dominant, and our copilot and auxiliary functions, like they're part of the tool set that we use to get through our biggest challenges, to problem solve, to prove to ourselves we can do that. Like a healthy self-esteem is one that has proven it can overcome obstacles. And so a self-esteem that has been, that is owned by somebody who's never done anything, who's developed no skills, that is no self-esteem at all, and we consider that unhealthy. So I think in some ways when it comes to our functions, it's more to see them as developmental levels, I think, when we look at this, not just the traumas that we experience as people and then how those get filtered through our functions. The functions themselves should also be going through these developmental levels in order to be healthy. And that, by definition, means skill development. So they're you almost can conflate them when it comes to functions to some extent.
Yeah, I think you'll see unhealthy demonstrations of type for all these different reasons, but you can have more leniency or understanding maybe for like the 15-year-old who's showing, perfect, like really good use of their dominant, but they're really sucky at their auxiliary function or their tertiary function. So I think, you can understand that and knowing that process is good too. Like you talked about, Antonia, like typically people don't really develop really good use of their auxiliary function until they're in their 20s. And then in their 30s and 40s, they get into tertiary, and then 50s to 60s, they start developing a healthier relationship with their inferior function. So knowing that that's a kind of general timeline can be helpful too. You're not going to see typically 15-year-old having a really good relationship with their tertiary function. But then you also run into people like I've known 60 and 70-year-olds who kind of grew up in an echo chamber. And so they don't have the same healthy relationship with their auxiliary or tertiary or inferior function because they're just living with people like them, and they're just staying in that like dominant function, that driver zone all the time.
So then if I go on to the comment section under this ENFP video, it's not for ENFPs, but talking about ENFPs and looking at all these comments, let's get real practical here. Should I expect better from these ENFPs who are ostensibly adults and say, you guys, you need to build the skill. You need to be healthy expressions of your type. Stop saying this is a type thing. Do better. Or should I say, well, that's really not the development. They're probably not going to get to be able to pay attention and sit still until they're in their 60s because that's their inferior 3-year-old process of introverted sensing or memory. And I can't expect them to sit and absorb lots of information on a long timeline. Like maybe they're right. Maybe they need to, I'm kind of being devil's advocate here, right? But like let people off the hook. Like when do we expect better of people? And then how do I know whether it's true stress and trauma or it's just lack of skill? Like how should we approach this, I guess, from each other? Like, I guess that's the question I have in my mind.
Well, I think, first of all, even though, your inferior function, for example, doesn't tend to become really healthy necessarily until you're in your 60s, I think you can jumpstart that process by learning about type and by practicing using those functions in your day-to-day life. Don't practice it when you're stressed out and you're at the end of your rope, but take some time. If you are an INFJ, I keep using myself as an example, take some time to play table tennis. Okay. Like that requires like being in the moment and responding to things as they happen. Make a recipe and experiment with flavors. Do things that help you in a low pressure way play with your inferior function or your tertiary function or your auxiliary or whatever it is, so that you learn to build that healthy relationship. Because when we don't know about type, a lot of times we just want to stay in our comfort zone. We don't want to push ourselves, and we just want to stay in that dominant place, or even like you guys have talked about the dominant tertiary loops. Practice what you're not good at. Like do it when your life is, calm and you're not really stressed, but take some time to practice that. And if you can't, or if like I'm really not good at this function, at least being aware of that can take you places. Like, you know what? I'm not really very good at extroverted sensation. But I'm going to be open-minded towards extroverted sensation. I'm not going to say it's impossible. Like in your example of the ENFP, they're saying it's impossible for, an ENFP to sit still here. And it's what's wrong with these people that they made this video this long for us ENFPs, there's certain things that I don't think it's impossible for a 15-year-old ENFP to sit and watch a 2-hour long video. I think people need to develop patience with the lower functions in their stack so that they can get through life. I mean, obviously there's things like ADHD and different things that can have an impact. So we can have compassion and understanding on the individual saying those things but while also saying, don't use your type as a crutch. Like, don't use it to stop yourself from growth. We have a right hand and a left hand. For an ENFP, the right hand is extroverted intuition and the left hand's introverted sensation in a way. But you still use your left hand. Like, I still use my left hand to type. So it's fully possible and wise for people to develop a certain amount of strength and patience with things that don't come naturally to them. Yeah, that's my perspective.
Yeah, I would totally agree with that. And I think when you say, well, what do we do? I think that we continue to make content that recommends people have a healthier relationship to personality types. Like, that's the one thing that we can do. We can constantly batter home this idea of like you were saying, Susan, one-sidedness is not a badge of honor, right? It's not. It's not the ideal to be the most extroverted intuition version or exploration version of an ENFP is not the end game. The end game is to actually be able to have that introverted sensing or memory ballast and to be able to root yourself in it and to not expect everybody to be there already, but to continue to give the message of if you're not there yet, don't keep giving yourself a pass. Like, there's a similar dynamic that actually happens with all the NPs. It's not just that video. Like, you'll look under the INTP video or some of the ENTP videos, and they're like, well, this is too long, and how do you expect me to do that? And then you'll see other people say, well, I found it interesting, and I've actually listened to it multiple times. So allowing also people to recognize that these are skills to develop. They're not just natural talents that are on-off switches. Like, oh, I didn't come with that, right? I didn't come with the listening, the capacity. Well, of course you did. As an ENFP, you have introverted feeling or authenticity as your co-pilot or auxiliary, and that's actually the listening function. Right? That function goes into a flow state when listening. So you absolutely have a listening part of you that isn't just introverted sensing. Now, it might have a struggle if there's no personal story there, right? Like it really goes into flow when it's listening to a personal story. But if they're in a space where they're listening to something that's interesting to them, they can be there for literally hours. So it's something where we continue to encourage people to remember that who you are right now is not the acme, right? Like, that's not the full expression of type. And please do not project this onto everybody else. And in reverse, when we're looking at, as people not of those types, when we're looking at those examples, like, I could get salty about ENFPs. I'm married to an ENFP, which helps.
No.
Yeah. Although that might make me salty too sometimes. But I could get salty about all those comments and be like, oh, they're just choosy beggars and they're being ungrateful and we put all this together and they don't know how much work went into it. Or I could just say, well, first of all, again, it wasn't for them. It was about them, which is a hard distinction to make. But if I was going to try to talk to ENFPs, I could say, there is a trend towards being unable to sit patiently and listen to a lot of data being thrown at them. And that's understandable because that's, like a bunch of data is not an interesting, engaging personal story narrative. And so if I'm going to talk to ENFPs, I should probably do it in this way. And when I'm talking to them and doing it in this way, maybe I can try to fold in the message of, try to avoid one-sidedness, try to develop the left hand as well as the right hand. Like, try to do that and you'll find yourself to be a happier person with a lot more productive output, because the same mentality says, I can't do this, I can't sit through this and listen is the same thing that haunts a person like that when they go, why can't I build career capital? Or why can't I just grind? Or why do I abandon a project at the 40% mark and I don't get any return on investment? Why does the world not see the value I have to give? And it's like, well, because you need to have follow through and they're all connected to each other. So I think recognizing that the healthiest relationship to type is to give ourselves understanding and go, there are some built-in limitations, just like there's some built-in, genius in all of it. There's some built-in advantages. And also, when you see these limitations, you either have to acknowledge them and not complain to the outside world that the outside world is not catering to your limitations, which is basically what all the salty comments are, right? Like, cater to me. It's like, well, that's not always going to be the case. And so when you're engaged in a moment of limitation, you recognize that, oh, that's my limitation, and maybe I just need to bounce. Maybe I just need to go find something that caters to it more. Or recognizes it, or maybe acknowledges it, but take it on as a personal responsibility. And then the next thought is, and then how do I balance that out? What do I do to make it so that this limitation isn't going to haunt me or become a problem?
We will be right back. If you're focused on personal growth, I think you'll resonate with our core content over at personalityhacker.com. We want to see you understand how your mind is wired so you can generate motivation, improve social skills, find career opportunities, and master excellent decision making. But a quick warning, we are advice and action focused in all of our articles, podcasts, and videos. This means that we attract people who like to be challenged to become excellent, to take action, to put in the work to optimize themselves, not simply just gather more information. If you are committed to personal growth and ready to radically find your inner truth, then come over and be a part of our growing community of like minds at Personality Hacker. Now back to the show. Okay, so I asked the question earlier, kind of to try to make a distinction between health and maturity, and now I'm going to make a statement. 80% of the time, we're talking about a maturity problem, not a health problem. When we're talking about unhealthy, healthy types, maybe 20% of the time, we're talking about an actual stress, trauma, unhealthy. But really, we're talking about maturity. We're talking about people that are an immature version of a type and a mature version of type. We're talking about skill development, maturity development.
Yeah, I think it's a good thing to do what you're doing and make the distinction between unhealthy versus immature. Yeah.
Well, and I mean, I don't know if I could put numbers onto it because a lot of people are dealing with a lot of really distressing things, and the world makes it so that trauma is easy to manifest. Like, most of us need healing, but I wouldn't disagree that most of the time it is maturing, because maturing and skill building actually in and of itself will take care of a lot of traumas. The traumas that you experience as a child are so much more palpable generally than as an adult, because maturing itself gives you a thicker skin. And so I think that regardless of whether or not it's a lack of health or trauma or stress or whatever, or it's a maturing problem or challenge, I would say that maturing, I mean, yes, of course, obviously, if you have a bruise, then the maturity to not cry over every bruise, or the ability to not cry over every bruise, is something that's, that you get that over time. You get that as you age. But if you have a broken bone, you need to see a doctor. And when it comes to where we're at, if something is a matter of the function itself could become better through maturing, then usually skill building and maturing as a person is the solution. If it's a trauma that lives underneath all of that, if it's a trauma that you have to get help for, then yeah, obviously you would want to go seek professional help in some capacity or do healing work to get through that. And so, but I think when it comes to us as individuals, I think sometimes we give ourselves a pass by saying, oh, something's a broken bone, when it really is actually a bruise. That happens a lot. And then on top of that, I think it's also, and I'm a representative of all people of my type, so I don't need to do anything about this.
Yeah.
I think that comes on top of it. And that is definitely a maturing issue. As far as how we treat other people, I mean, I try to default to generosity. Like, if somebody acts like a dick to me, I've been a dick in the past, so I try to go, well, that's just a phase they're in, or that's just something they're going through, or they wouldn't be this way if they were in a place of abundance. And so I try to give other people a pass and not make assumptions about what's going on for them. But when it comes to me, I usually go, okay, can I deal with this in a more mature way? If I don't like something, can I just leave, or do I have to make a stink about it, or do I have to make sure my voice is heard? It's like, most of the time the answer is it doesn't matter anyway. So I'm just going to let that thing live and let it live for the people who do enjoy it and not have to put my stamp of disapproval on it. Mm-hmm. And I think that there's a generally, do I have to be salty in the world? Do I have to constantly give my disapproval? Or can I just, recognize that maybe I'm the person that has some limitations and reflect back and go, is this a problem? Is there something I should address? Is this an example of one-sidedness? Can I grow here? And if the answer is like, well, that might just not be for me, right? Like, because I'm just not into everything, then it's a neutral. Then I just go, okay, that's not my thing. And then I just, go about my business.
If we identify two things from this conversation, it's one is don't give a pass to yourself using your personality type. I guess we're saying even if you would identify as being unhealthy, like you've got trauma or stress, it doesn't necessarily give you a pass. There might be other healing you have to do. And the other part is don't project onto others this like type stereotype, right? So just to kind of land the plane, finish up this podcast with some practical things we could go away with for somebody listening right now. If you're listening, you're like, okay, Joel, Susan, and Antonia, nice what you're saying, but what do how can I apply this to my life? So let's talk a little bit about the first one. No pass for yourself. Antonia, I think you started that conversation by saying when you realize something, how did you just say it just now? You said that if I see something that's not for me, is that how you articulated it?
Yeah, like not everything is for me, and that doesn't mean that I have to do something about it.
Yeah.
Yeah, but there are things that are for me, and I'm just not at a place where I can appreciate them, and then the onus is on me to become, to get to a place where I can.
Okay. And what are some other ways we can not give ourselves passes in this?
I think realizing, when you need help is a big one. I could just bring up one of my own issues. Like when I first started writing about INFJs, for example, I have some issues related to my own trauma where I had some codependency issues. And then I met lots of, INFJs who also had codependency issues. So I started writing about extroverted feeling like it was this codependency flavor. And that's not actually how it is for all FJ types, but realizing, okay, I need actually something outside of type. So we're talking a lot about type and how to see whether it's healthy or mature, but sometimes the answers to maturity lie completely outside of type. And like we were saying, like I think Antonia was saying, sometimes you do need professional help to work with some deeper underlying issues before you can be like, for example, like me being INFJ, me spending 10 minutes a day working on extroverted sensation isn't going to solve my codependency issue, or me trying to like use type to be the doctor for all of my problems isn't going to, it's not going to save me from every storm. So I think one of the important things to do is to sit down with yourself and differentiate, okay, what's a type issue that I can work on, and what's an issue that maybe I need to see a counselor or find a book on, maybe codependency or whatever mental issue I'm dealing with, what's type and what's not, and figuring out which resource you need to fix those things.
Yeah, I think that's great. That is a good perspective to come from. I think another way to quote unquote not give yourself a pass is to sometimes give yourself a pass. That is to be generous with your with what's going on for you as well, because you're not always going to be at the healthiest levels. Like you're going to have like moments when your functions are showing up in an unhealthy way. It's a sliding scale. And if you recognize that, then when you're having a moment to be human, and you kind of go, okay, I get a moment to be human, and I give myself a pass on being imperfect, then I don't have, then I'm not putting so much pressure on myself to then have to twist my perspective of my unhealthy moments into like something normal. Like I don't create a normative around those unhealthy moments.
So what you're doing is you're saying, okay, here's something that's coming up for me. This is a behavior of mine. This isn't me. This is a behavior I'm exhibiting that's coming from maybe something that's unhealthy or less mature, but that's not the totality of who I am.
Right, but if you can't face that you have these imperfect moments, if you can't be generous with yourself and go, okay, I failed there with all of the ramifications of the word failure, right? Like I'm not good in that moment. If you can't do that, then you won't address those behaviors and they'll become more and more common to you. And then eventually they just become an identity or a definition, and then type then becomes your out. It goes, well, I can't do that because, and then type is your savior. Just like Susan mentioned, it can't be your savior all the time. And so sometimes we turn it into our savior because we're trying to rationalize behaviors that really should be addressed. And I think if you go, okay, I'm not always going to show up at my healthiest self, that's okay. But then when if I don't put too much pressure on myself and I just sit with those moments, then I can I can bring it into conscious awareness. I'm not always trying to, sweep it under the rug or kick the can or whatever, to a place where now I need all of these rationalizations and all of these excuses for myself, and type becomes one of them.
That's so, so, so important. I think having compassion for ourselves, because we're not going to be perfect. I mean, I'm not going to be as good at SE things as an ESTP. And, an ENFP is not going to be as good at SI things as an ISTJ. So having compassion for ourselves, but also humility to know, you know what, I even though type made this mistake easier for me to make, it's still a mistake that I need to address, instead of going, well, how could you expect me to do this SI thing well? I'm an ENFP. Like, it was wrong of you to even expect that I could do this SI thing. Yes, we should have compassion on ourselves and understand that it's easier for us to trip up over, an SI thing, but also have humility to go, but I still made that mistake, and I still need to, face the music of making that mistake.
As we move over to not projecting onto others, I think what both of you are talking about helps with this. From my standpoint, the more I can not give myself a pass and realize that there's some things I got to work on, it's not the totality of me, it's a behavior of mine. It actually helps me see that in other people. I go, oh, okay, that's a behavior of theirs. That's not their full type. Or they're dealing with what they're dealing with in their own way, and that's their expression of that. Do we have some other ideas on how we can maybe also take some of these ideas and not go, well, I had a bad experience with, like you said earlier, Susan, I had a bad experience with ISFP, so that must be all ISFPs show up this way. Are there strategies you've both implemented in your life that, like mine is to really focus in on myself? I don't know if that's an introverted feeling thing. What do you guys do to make sure you don't project?
Well, I think some of it is knowledge, just knowing, okay, this is what unhealthy FI looks like versus healthy FI. But then I also do a little bit of what you're talking about, Joel, where I'm like, okay, how many mistakes have I made? Like, I'm not perfect either. And maybe this isn't exactly what you were saying you do, but I do that a lot too, where I judge someone and I'm like, oh, wait, let me look back. Do I do that? Or is there some other thing that's similar? And I think some of that comes from like the Christian faith of like the Bible verse. It's like, judge not lest you be judged, or don't point out the speck in your brother's eye when you have a plank in your own. Like, that was really hammered into me. So for me, a lot of it is like, okay, should I have like compassion on this person while still admitting that what they did is wrong? Yeah. So I think that's one of the things that I'd love to explore more with you, both of you, is learning about what healthy and unhealthy manifestations of each cognitive function actually looks like. Because when we don't know that, it can be easy to think, oh, this is a type thing, like all ISFPs are this way, because we don't know the difference between healthy versus unhealthy. So that's something I think that is really a positive thing for people to learn.
Yeah, I think that is an excellent idea. We should totally record a podcast on that. And also, to piggyback on what you just said, Susan, I think if you're going to use personality types as a tool to inform how you engage with yourself and engage with other people, there's a danger in doing half measures. Like, a little bit of knowledge is dangerous sometimes. And so one of the things that, like you mentioned, Susan, you can get more proficient in understanding differences and becoming more aware of differences in healthy and unhealthy. But I think also being willing to go hunt for positive examples of a type. I famously have this thing about ISTJs. And you know what? We have a growing ISTJ audience, which I think is amazing. And if you're an ISTJ, thanks for hanging around, even though every once in a while I'm like, ISTJs, right? But what I realized, it was actually their response to me, because
it's you.
It's actually me. I'm the
your problem.
And so when I realized that, I started going, okay, so what am I doing that's triggering the ISTJs in my life? And when I run into somebody who I suspect might be that type, can I soften myself a little bit? Not change who I am, but give them an opportunity to express themselves less in reaction to me and more just who they are. And when I did that, I started realizing I actually have some great ISTJs in my life, people who I think are wonderful people. And so when I just softened, when I backed off the pedal a little bit and didn't make myself so overtly, like I have a right to overtly trigger them, when I gave them a little bit of space, they started showing up beautifully. And I was like, I have so many things about that type that I find that I take great appreciation, or I have great appreciation for. And then the same deal, like I had a couple ISFPs in my life that were driving me nuts. And so I started to get this attitude. And then I started noticing that, like in Profile Training, we have quite a few ISFPs in our Profile Training group. And oh my gosh, the insights that come from the ISFPs and the things that they say and the knowledge that they share with our overwhelmingly intuitive audience it's priceless. And my appreciation and gratitude for people of this type grew because I was dealing with people of this type who were in scarcity, who actually had a lot of legit trauma and had some, maybe mental health issues. And I was conflating those two things together. When I actively looked for people of that type that had good things and positive things, then I realized how much my biases had been stacking on top of each other. We start to get this idea or this narrative in our head, and it's easy to reinforce that. We really early in our podcast career, we created this podcast called What the Thinker Thinks the Prover Proves. And one of the challenges is once you get an idea in your head, your brain's job is to now reinforce that idea as much as possible. So if you take control back of that and go, actually, I'm going to look for evidence to the contrary, and I'm going to try to break through those biases through conscious efforts, usually there's plenty of material there. There's tons of evidence to the contrary, particularly when we're talking about type, because type is not a monolith. And there are 16 types, but there's 7 billion people. So looking for evidence to the contrary is actually quite easy. You just have to put it into a practice.
And I think one of the fun ways to do that is, a lot of people like to learn about like fictional characters and their types. And I always am I write articles about fictional characters of types, but it's always like, please take this with a grain of salt because it's really hard to type fictional characters. You're not having a consultation with them or anything like that. But sometimes if you're like, oh, I really can't stand, like, I don't know, ISTJs, let me look up like someone like some fictional potential ISTJs and see like them in movies where they're like heroes or where they're doing something great and be like, oh, okay, now I can kind of like sometimes even just doing that can help you to see those functions and those types in action and appreciate what they really do. That's amazing.
Yeah, and to be careful not to mistype people based on whether or not you like them. Like that's an early mistake that's made. If I run into an ISTJ that I really like, I can't be like, oh, they must be an ISFJ because I like them. It's like, no, this is an ISTJ. And so that's also an easy mistake to make in early days. It's one of the reasons why people who are intuitive that learn type, suddenly everybody in the world's intuitive because they like them. And it's like, no, that's not how that works. In fact, most of the people in your life are probably sensors and you like them. So that should tell you something.
So what do you think? You've been listening along with us. You're the fourth person in this conversation, and we want to hear from you. You haven't had a microphone, but now is your chance to come over to personalityhacker.com, make your voice heard underneath this episode. In the comment section, please feel free to leave a comment, ask a question, or more importantly, share your personal story. Maybe you have experienced unhealthy or healthy versions of personality types in your life. Maybe you've gone through some healing processes to become more healthy or more mature as a type in your own right. We want to hear from you. Come over to personalityhacker.com and make your voice heard. And Susan, thank you so much for being with us on the show this week to guest host. We've really enjoyed having you.
It's been so much fun. Thank you so much for inviting me.
Where can people find out more about you if they want to follow you?
You can always check out my website at psychologyjunkie.com. There's hundreds of articles on there that you can look for. You can also find me on Facebook at facebook.com/psychologyjunkie. But my website is the best place to begin.
Yeah, and I love Psychology Junkie articles. Don't let them fool you. A lot of them are listicles, but they have so much gold in there. So when I say that, I mean like they're truly both educational and entertaining. So perfect mixture.
And Susan's written some articles for our site as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. All right. And if you enjoyed this podcast, you can subscribe to us on iTunes and various Android platforms. If you leave a rating and review for us on iTunes, that helps us out a lot. We have a book. It's called Personality Hacker. You can get it at all major book retailers. And if you leave us a rating and review on Amazon or on Goodreads, that also helps us out a lot. We also produce personal growth programs through the lens of personality type. If that sounds interesting to you, go to personalityhacker.com and look at our suite of programs under our catalog and see if there's one that's right for you.
My name is Joel Mark Witt.
I'm Susan Storm.
And I'm Antonia Dodge.
And we'll talk with you on the next Personality Hacker Podcast. If you're focused on personal growth, I think you'll resonate with our core content over at personalityhacker.com. We want to see you understand how your mind is wired so you can generate motivation, improve social skills, find career opportunities, and master excellent decision making. But a quick warning, we are advice and action focused in all of our articles, podcasts, and videos. This means that we attract people who like to be challenged to become excellent, to take action, to put in the work to optimize themselves, not simply just gather more information. If you are committed to personal growth and ready to radically find your inner truth, then come over and be a part of our growing community of like minds at Personality Hacker.